For most of his career, James Gunn was the guy with the offbeat, trashy sense of humor, a filmmaker who built his name on gore, vulgar jokes, and movies designed to shock. That persona helped him climb from cult obscurity to Marvel's A-list, where he turned Guardians of the Galaxy into a billion-dollar franchise. But just as quickly, it all came crashing down. Old tweets resurfaced, outrage spread, and Disney fired him in one of the highest-profile cancellations in Hollywood. Yet, instead of fading away, Gunn pulled off one of the most unlikely comebacks of the modern era, with him now running DC. So how did he do it? To find out, let's take a look at how James Gunn went from cancelled to running DC Studios. Long before he became the face of one of the biggest movie studios on the planet, Gunn's stylistic brand of humor leaned into the provocative, loud, offensive, and purposely inappropriate. He developed this style of humor when he launched his career at Troma Entertainment, the proudly trashy studio behind cult oddities like the Toxic Avengers. At Troma, Gunn wrote and directed Tromeo and Juliet, a punk rock riff on the classic Shakespeare play that heavily relied on gore and vulgar humor to parody its original source material. The movie fit right in with Troma's ethos. Take the cheapest production possible, lace it with taboo-shattering humor, and dare audiences to walk out, creating free marketing through word of mouth. That environment shaped Gunn's early voice. Comedy designed to offend and provoke by overtly crossing the line. These instincts then bled into his public persona and social media presence, where he fired off deliberately outrageous jokes in the same spirit. His time at Troma kickstarted his career, but it also locked in a style of shock comedy that would later return to haunt him once he was working under the Disney umbrella. Gunn then carried that proudly transgressive sense of humor into his early directorial work. His debut feature as a director, Slither, was a dark horror comedy stuffed with grotesque body horror and splattery practical effects, a creature feature that reveled in gross-out humor as much as it did scares. His follow-up, Super, was a morbid satire of the superhero genre, contrasting the absurdity of vibrantly costumed superheroes with visceral violence. Around the same time, he launched James Gunn's PG Porn, a sketch series parodying porn tropes with tongue-in-cheek sexual humor. Meanwhile, Marvel Studios was at a turning point. They had just pulled off The Avengers, proving its shared universe model could dominate the box office, and it was looking to expand into more cosmic and bizarre corners of the Marvel library. They needed a director for their biggest gamble yet, Guardians of the Galaxy, a team of lesser-known cosmic characters, including a talking raccoon and sentient tree, with virtually no mainstream recognition. Marvel knew it needed a filmmaker who could make the absurd feel accessible, and Gunn's edgy sense of humor and taste for balancing the bizarre with sincerity seemed like the perfect fit, as he was hired to direct. However, Gunn's taste for edgy humor and desire to be provocative came back to bite him, after this new attention from being under the Marvel spotlight brought new eyes to his past work. Gunn's first public apology for offensive jokes came shortly after he was announced to direct the first Guardians film, 6 whole years before his much more infamous firing from Marvel. That led to leaving the third entry in the franchise. Gunn faced a lot of backlash at the time for a blog post he had written in 2011 titled The 50 Superheroes You Most Wanted to Have Sex With, which was widely criticized. In response, Gunn issued a statement stating that, though the intention was to be funny and satirical, he recognized that the piece ultimately failed to be either, and that he doesn't hold the views that the blog post suggests. He went on to apologize for all offense caused, and promised to try to be better in the future. With Gunn's apology mostly accepted by the internet, Marvel went ahead with the production of Guardians of the Galaxy. Gunn took an incredibly direct role in casting, and personally fought for many of the actors who didn't initially seem like safe bets. Gunn wanted a Peter Quill who could bring his own personality to the character. Always Sunny in Philadelphia actor Glenn Howerton was a top choice, and seemed like an obvious casting with his leading man good looks. But Gunn favored the slightly less conventional Chris Pratt for the role. Pratt brought a more childlike charisma and goofy sense of humor that would go on to define the character. Gunn personally coached Pratt through early auditions, gradually shaping the same portrayal of the character that would eventually make it to the big screen. Up until this point, Pratt had a reputation for striking out on big auditions. However, his casting in Guardians flipped his career trajectory overnight, turning him into a leading man who would go on to helm multiple franchises. While Marvel had their own preferences for the casting of Drax and Nebula, Gunn fought hard for Dave Bautista and Karen Gillan in the roles, eventually winning both. Gillan credits her casting as Nebula for her breakthrough in the US, while Bautista has repeatedly praised Gunn for taking a chance on him, saying that the role changed his life. Today, Bautista is widely regarded as the most critically acclaimed wrestler-turned-actor, a trajectory launched by his role as Drax. Gunn also had to fight for his longtime collaborator Michael Rooker to be cast as Yondu, knowing that while his part in the first film might might appear as a relatively generic villain, he had plans to expand the role significantly in the sequel, and Rooker would be perfect for that performance. The result of Gunn fighting so hard for these castings didn't just create a team that worked on screen, it created strong bonds off-screen too. Gunn had earned a reputation amongst his collaborators for fighting for them when they needed it, and he had earned their loyalty for that, which would be paid back later. Fast forward to 2018, and Gunn had 2 Guardians films under his belt, and was moving forward with a third. Then, hot off a wave of public cancellations in Hollywood, a series of Gunn's old tweets were dug up and quickly went viral. The tweets in question were deliberately outrageous jokes that relied on shock value and transgressive topics, much in the vein of the shock jester persona he once found success with, but had moved on from. However, the controversy of these old tweets wasn't necessarily organic. Gunn's offensive tweets were amplified by right-wing media figures who wanted to punish Gunn for being publicly critical of then-President Trump. Their intention was to expose the traditionally left-wing Hollywood elite as not being as pure as they claimed to be. They ignored Gunn's previous apology and put pressure on Disney to fire him. Caught up in all the negative press and intense media scrutiny, Alan Horn, Walt Disney Studios chairman, quickly announced that they had cut ties with Gunn and that Guardians 3 would be put on hold while they searched for a new director. The decision was swift and final. Overnight, Gunn went from being one of Marvel's most reliable creative voices to a liability the studio wanted nothing to do with. For a filmmaker who had just spent years climbing from cult obscurity into blockbuster territory, the fall from grace was staggering. In the summer of 2018, it genuinely looked as though James Gunn's Hollywood career was over. However, the entire core cast of Guardians of the Galaxy signed a shared letter asking Disney to reconsider. Batista went even further, publicly calling the firing nauseating and saying he wouldn't return for another Guardians movie without Gunn. Gunn has since described that moment as transformational. He felt like his career was over, and he was preparing to figure out a way to survive with the finances he had left. With a flood of support from his friends and fans made him feel truly accepted by the industry he had long sought to belong to. Disney quickly began having conversations with Gunn to repair their relationship, with Marvel Studio president Kevin Feige personally fighting for Gunn to be reinstated. At the same time, however, Warner Brothers, who held the license to DC superheroes, recognized an opportunity and reached out. Initially, they offered him the chance to direct a new Superman film, but Gunn wasn't interested, finding Superman too daunting of a character to take on. Warner Brothers then offered him the chance to pitch whatever project that excited him, so Gunn went away and developed several different ideas. One of these ideas that never saw the light of day was a film revolving around Krypto the Wonder Dog, with Superman as a background character. Eventually, though, Gunn settled on developing his own take on David Ayer's Suicide Squad. Ironically, Warner Brothers recut Suicide Squad without Ayer to make it more closely resemble Guardians of the Galaxy, the very franchise Gunn had just been fired from. The same day Gunn signed the deal with Warner Brothers to direct Suicide Squad, he got a call from Alan Horn saying that he didn't think Gunn being fired was right, and that he wanted to find a way for Gunn to return to Marvel. Feige, who maintained a friendship with Gunn throughout the drama, reached out to Gunn to congratulate him on coming back for Guardians 3. However, Gunn replied that there was another project he had to do first, to which Feige replied, "Ugh, you're doing Superman, aren't you?" Even though Feige's guess was wrong, it was prophetic about what was yet to come for Gunn's career, which had survived a cancellation and was only going to continue to get better. And while Gunn would eventually return to complete the Guardians trilogy, DC would lure him away for good with an offer to run DC Studios itself, becoming DC's version of Kevin Feige. However, Gunn didn't want to deal with the business side of things, so only took the job if he could do it alongside producer Peter Safran, who would handle the producing and business-facing operations, while Gunn would lead the creative. Gunn's first move was to make the film Warner Brothers asked him to make back in 2018, Superman, as he would reboot the DC universe. Cancel culture can take a career down in an instant, and it can be especially damaging when people are forced to pay for mistakes they made well in the past. But Gunn's journey shows that it doesn't have to be permanent. He's proof that while accountability matters, people can also grow, learn, and come back stronger if given the chance. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories and unmade movies.